Hey readers, my name is Jess, and today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in February. I actually only have 4 books to share this month because I just started a new job, and with that adjustment I simply didn't have as much reading time, but I still read some great books, so without further ado, let's get into it. The first book that I read this month was The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I have loved everything I've read by Sanderson so far. I've been recommended this book a few times in the comments and have only ever heard fantastic things about this series, and still, this book exceeded every expectation I had, and my expectations were high. This is the first book in the Stormlight Archive, and I'm going to do my best to summarize it briefly without spoiling anything, so here goes. The setting of the story is Roshar, and within Roshar, one of the kings, Gavilar, has been murdered. As a result of that death, a war breaks out against the Parshendi, who sent an assassin to kill the king. We alternate through primarily 3 different character perspectives, all of whom are connected to the conflict in some way. We've got the king's brother Dalinar, who is a high prince and war leader. We have Shallan, a light eyes on a mission to save her family under the guise of pursuing an apprenticeship with the princess, and Kaladin, an intriguing bridgeman with a tragic past. One thing that I kept thinking throughout my time reading this book was that Kaladin is one of my favorite characters I've read about, and ironically I think the last time I had that thought was with Bin in Mistborn, so I guess I just feel very strongly towards Sanderson's protagonists. But I thought that Kaladin was such a well-rounded character. We get a pretty good look at his past, allowing us to better understand him, and throughout the current timeline, we see so many different sides of his character. He has trauma and troubles to face, but he also has so much mental and physical strength, and he experiences so much growth throughout the story. I just can't help but root for him in every way. As I mentioned, Kaladin isn't the only main character in this book, but I can honestly say that I really enjoyed all of the main protagonists' storylines. I like the way they're all facing different challenges but still feel interconnected, and I can't wait to see how these stories continue to overlap as I keep reading the series. I remember when I watched Sanderson's lecture series, he said something along the lines of, "The reader should be able to tell which character is talking even without you telling them." Not only does he achieve this with the more prominent characters' dialogue like Kaladin and Dalinar, who have these really strong voices, but he even achieves this with the side characters, which I found to be remarkable considering how many characters we are introduced to in this massive book. And I have to be honest, it is a really big book. It's the first book in a series coming in at over 1,000 pages. That can certainly be intimidating, but I did think that it was well-paced and always engaging. For me, the characters were a really big part of that. I do kind of feel like I'm fawning over the characters at this point, but I just felt that they all had these incredible arcs that were not only well executed and entertaining, but also inspiring. My hand is cramping. This book is so big. If you've never read a book by this author before, you just have to know that he has a real gift for world building. In my opinion, it is his biggest strength, and boy does he use it. If you're someone who appreciates world building with unique magic systems and interesting politics and lots of characters, then you'll probably love Brandon Sanderson. In contrast, if you're someone who struggles to get through world building in fantasy novels, then it might not be the best fit. But I think one of the reasons he's so good at it is because he doesn't info dump. You are learning more and more about this extraordinary world he's created from the first page to the very last, which encourages you as the reader to want to discover more alongside these characters. I have so many questions and theories and things that I need to happen in the future books, and I just genuinely had such a good time reading this. If you're a fan of epic fantasy and you haven't picked this up yet, you need to. And thanks to Andrew for convincing me to push it up my TBR list. I cannot wait to continue reading this series. The next book that I read was Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys. I read I Must Betray You last month and loved it so much that I knew I wanted to read some of this author's other work. This is a YA historical fiction taking place in 1941. We follow a 15-year-old girl named Lena and her family who are deported from their home in Lithuania during the Soviet takeover. Lena and her mother and younger brother are separated from her father. They have no idea where they're going and if they will ever be able to return home, and they're treated as criminals even though they've done nothing wrong. They are forced to board a train taking them to a work camp in Siberia where they will have to face starvation, illness, and abuse while they dream of reuniting as a family and returning home. Lena, an artist, promises to pass her art along to others throughout their journey in hopes that the pieces reach her father and encourage him to find his way back to them. But the family is not alone. The Soviets are deporting trains full of people like them. There's a pretty minor romantic subplot. I'm emphasizing minor because I don't want you to pick up this book expecting a romance. With that said, I found there to be something so beautiful about those few moments of sweet and innocent affection amidst all the devastation. And I know I always say this, but I love reading about events in history that I'm not super familiar with, and I feel that Stalin's deportation of Lithuanians and other Baltic countries might sometimes get overshadowed by some of the other atrocities of the World War II era, but I think it is so important that we acknowledge events like these, and I'm so grateful to Sepetys for giving readers a glimpse into the lives of those affected. This book was incredibly emotional and painful, and I truly feared for the characters throughout the whole thing. And I guess that shows how effectively the author is setting the scene. She's not really sugarcoating things. There are some disturbing scenes and some shocking treatment of the displaced Europeans, but I can appreciate that honest depiction of Stalin's occupation. I flew through this book, finishing it in less than 24 hours. It's fast-paced and the chapters are really short. If you like historical fiction, or if you're fascinated by this era of history, I would definitely recommend it. But if you're anything like me, have tissues on hand, because I think you might need them. The next book that I picked up was A Sea of Unspoken Things by Adrienne Young. I loved Adrienne Young's writing in The Unmaking of June Farrow, which I read last year, so I knew I really wanted to read this new 2025 release. We follow James, an artist living in the city after leaving her small town and all the baggage that came with it. Except she has to return to the small town after 20 years away when her twin brother Johnny is found dead in what is being described as a hunting accident. But James and Johnny have always had this sort of supernatural twin connection. Oftentimes James feels like she can feel whatever Johnny does, and when Johnny died, she felt it as if it was her own pain. James doesn't think that Johnny's death was really an accident, but it's becoming clear that she didn't know as much about her brother as she thought she did. So we get to accompany James on this journey of uncovering secrets about her brother's life and his final moments as she tries to discover the truth about Johnny's death. The setting is perfect. It takes place in this really small town surrounded by this eerie and alluring forest, and the forest is where Johnny was conducting some of his research for work and where his body was found, so it plays this pretty significant role in the story. James has to face this forest and all of its unanswered questions if she wants to find out what really happened to her brother. There is a romantic subplot, and while I enjoyed it, I will say I kind of felt like Young was telling us how much these characters cared for one another rather than truly showing us. Along those same lines, sometimes these characters felt a little flat. That's not to say I didn't like them, because I did. I just feel like if I were to describe each of these characters, I could maybe throw out one or two personality traits as well as their relation to Johnny, and not much beyond that. But by the end, I was just really so captivated in the mystery and desperately wanted to know what happened and the fate of the characters. While I did have some theories that were somewhat accurate, I was still surprised by some of the twists and reveals and thought they were executed very well. Overall, I did enjoy this book and I found the mystery to be very thrilling, but I'd probably be more inclined to recommend Young's other novel, The Unmaking of June Farrow, before this one, though I think they're both solid options and would both make great book club picks. Finally, I read Lovely War by Julie Berry, and I am so glad I read this book during Valentine's season because it is a historical fiction novel where Aphrodite, the goddess of love, affectionately tells the love stories of two young couples during the Great War in Europe. Sometimes Aphrodite's narration was interrupted by Apollo, Ares, or Hades, who offered their perspective on music, war, and death, which I thought was a really original and fun way to tell the story of a war that has been explored in literature so many times. One of the couples we follow is James and Hazel, who meet in London right before James is set to head off into the war. It's unfortunate timing, but the couple falls hard and fast and are determined to make it work despite the circumstances. Hazel begins volunteering with YMCA Relief in France while James is off fighting, and it is here that we are introduced to our second couple, Aubrey and Colette. Aubrey is a Black US soldier with a love of jazz, and Colette is a Belgian girl with a beautiful voice and a devastating backstory. Being together isn't so simple for them either, but for different reasons. Obviously, this is a book about war, so there are certainly moments of tragedy and devastation, but I felt that they were well balanced with those pure and sweet romantic storylines. I also loved how Barry was able to touch upon race and discrimination. Aubrey is an African American soldier who faces prejudice and disturbing treatment at the camps due to the color of his skin. I just think this is a really important part of the war to acknowledge, and I thought it was done well. These soldiers are brave and full of life and passion and are sacrificing their lives the same as every other man in the war. I think if you're looking for an emotional romantic story that's easy to read, this would be a great pick. Historical fiction is one of my favorite genres, but I do think that I would say romance is the primary focus of this book. So if you aren't as crazy about historical fiction, you might still really enjoy this one. So those are the books that I read in February. I hope this video was helpful in giving you a better idea of what you can expect from these titles. Thank you so much for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time. Bye!